Hello students, welcome to YouTube channel Vidya for Success. Dear students, in this video let us study another important concept in the chapter inheritance. In the previous video we have studied how to define a derived class. At the time of deriving the class, we will be choosing the visibility. We will be choosing the visibility mode. As I told you earlier, visibility mode can be of three types. It can be private visibility mode, it can be of public visibility mode, and it can be of protected visibility mode. Okay, so from a base class, we will be deriving a new class. At the time of deriving a new class, we will be inheriting some properties or all the properties of the base class. So, it all depends upon the visibility mode. What is the type of inheritance we are going with? So, the type of inheritance, it can be either private type of inheritance, it can be public inheritance, or it can be protected inheritance. So, in today's video, let us study in detail, in depth, what is visibility mode. Please notice here, in a human life, let us say that for a father, we will be considering a son. Okay. So, here father is the base class. From the base class father, we will be deriving a class by the name son. So, the class son can inherit all the properties or else all the data of the base class, or it can, the class son can inherit only few properties. It all depends upon the visibility mode. Okay, it all depends upon the visibility mode, what type of visibility we are going with. It can be, as I told you, private, it can be public, it can be protected, you can go with any one. If I want to go with only few data, if I want to, if the, for example, the base class, if it want to restrict only few data members to be inherited, then I can go with the visibility mode private or protected. On the other hand, if the base class, if it is ready to give out all the data members of its class, then we can go with the visibility mode public. So, let us study them using a table. Okay. So, please notice here. So, a base class, usually, as you are already aware, will be having 3 access specifiers. So, within a class, we will be housing the data. The data can be kept either in private access specifier, or else it can be in public access specifier, or it can be kept in protected access specifier. So, the base class will be having 3 access specifier. It can be public, it can be private, or it can be protected. Okay. So, base class data can be kept either in public access specifier or in private, or it can be kept in protected access specifier. So, now we will be inheriting the properties from the base class. Please notice here. So, we will be inheriting the properties of the base class. So, how are you going to inherit? It all depends upon the type of inheritance mode what we are choosing. So, we will be inheriting from the base class to a derived class. So, at the time of inheriting, we will be choosing a particular type of inheritance. Okay. So, what is the type? So we will be deriving a class. So a derived class can be derived in any one of the following way. It can be derived publicly, it can be derived or else inherited privately, or else it can be inherited in a protected way. Okay, so these are the three different ways of inheriting the data members of the base class. So the first one is public inheritance. That is, I will be inheriting the base class data members to a derived class. By what mode? By what type of inheritance? By public inheritance. Okay, I will be choosing, I will be going with public inheritance. So what happens if you go with public inheritance? Then public members of the base class, if there are any public members of the base class, if there are any data in public access specifier, then public members of the base class will become public members of the derived class. Okay, they become public members of the derived class. On the other hand, if there are any private data members in the base class, if there are any private members in the base class, if there are any private members in the base class, these private data members cannot be inherited at any circumstance. We cannot inherit them. So, not inherited, or else you can also refer it as not inheritance. Inheritance, not inheritance. Okay. So, the public members of the base class will become public members of the derived class. Private members of the base class cannot be inherited. In case if there are any protected data members, these protected data members will remain protected data members of the derived class. Will remain protected members of the derived class. So this is public inheritance. Please understand here. So I am deriving a new class from a base class using public inheritance. So then what happens? Then public member of the base class will become public member of the derived class. Private member of the base class cannot be inherited. Protected member of the base class will become protected members of the derived class. Okay. So this is how the public inheritance work. Now let us go with private inheritance. So if there is a base class, I would like to derive a new class with private type of inheritance, Then what happens? Then public members of the base class will become private members of the derived class, will become private members of the base class. Private members of the base class again cannot be inherited. So not inherited or not inheritance. Okay. What about protected members of the base class? The protected members of the base class will become private members of the derived class. Private members of the derived class. Please notice here. Let me explain. So there is a class. There is one base class. Okay. So there is a base class. So here in base class, let us say there are data kept at both in all access specifiers, private, public and protected. What happens if I derive a new class? What happens if I derive a new class, derived class? Here also in derived class, let us say there are 3 access specifiers, private, public, followed by protected. So if I choose private inheritance, if I am inheriting using the visibility mode private, then private members of the base class cannot be inherited. Please notice here, private members of the base class cannot be inherited. What about public members? Public members of the base class will become private members of the derived class. What they will become? These public members of the base class, they will come and they will settle down in private members of the derived class. And what about the protected members of the derived class? Even protected members of the derived class will become private members of the derived class. Okay. So, protected members of the base class will become private members of the derived class in inheritance done via the private, with the visibility mode private. The last one is protected inheritance. Okay, if you are inheriting using visibility mode protected, then again public members of the base class, public member of the base class, this is public members of the base class will become protected member of the derived class, will become protected member of the derived class. Okay, if we are going with protected inheritance, we are choosing protected inheritance. Then what about private members of the base class? The private members of the base class cannot be inherited, And what about protected members of the base class? The protected members of the base class become protected member of the derived class. Okay, so this is how we can explain the visibility mode using this particular table in an easy fashion. Okay, so once again I will explaining you. Please notice here, there are 3 visibility modes which can be used at the time of defining a derived class. The 3 visibility modes are public, private and protected. What happens if we use public inheritance? Then public members of the base class become public members of the derived class. Private members of the base class cannot be inherited. Protected member of the base class will remain big protected members of the derived class. If we choose private inheritance, then public members of the base class will become private members of the derived class. Private members of the base class cannot be inherited. Protected members of the base class will change over to private members of the derived class. If we go with protected inheritance, then public members of the base class will convert to protected members of the derived class. Private members of the base class cannot be inherited. At last, protected members of the base class will become or will be settled down in protected members of the derived class. Okay. So now let me tell you what is visibility. Now I am defining it. So visibility mode is nothing but a way of controlling the access of data members. For example, the best example, my grandfather and also my father has given me some characteristics. Nothing but I have inherited some of the characteristics from my father or forefathers. They have given me, or else I have drawn some of the characteristics, but some of their characteristics are private to them. I may not be able to inherit them. So, here visibility mode will tell us, will describe what data members or what characteristics are accessible to a derived class and what are not accessible to a derived class. So, I hope you have understood this. With this, I am going to end this video. Thank you.